Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolfork. I'm a fourth-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Stitch Please podcast. I am your host, Lisa Woolfork, and I am delighted to welcome Reverend Dr. Renita J. Weems. Reverend Dr. Weems is a fantastic human, a scholar, a theologian. Look, she is doing something I can't even pronounce, y'all. A theologian, a quilt maker, as well as a leader in creating a quilt guild in Nashville, Tennessee. She is the first woman to get a PhD in Hebrew Bible, or Old Hebrew. She is an author of many books. And one of the things I love about her work is her commitment to Black women, faith, and healing. That's what I've received from her work. And one of her books is called Just a Sister Away. And in that book, she says that sometimes our healing is just a sister away. The idea of recognizing in another sister a story that one might find within oneself and the hope for mercy in that encounter. She is a co-pastor of the New Hope Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Ray of Hope Church in Nashville, Tennessee. And again, listen, I'm going to put a link to her Wikipedia entry in the show notes. How about that? That's what I'll do. And then y'all can find out more about the wonderful things that she does like that on your own. I will mention this. This is fantastic. There is a book called Black Stars. And it is anthology or a reference book of over 200 influential, timeless Black spiritual religious leaders who have made vital contributions to American life and the American church and the spiritual and physical liberation of Black people. It includes figures such as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. It includes figures like Sojourner Truth, Adam Clayton Powell, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It also includes the person you are looking at right now on this video interview. Not me, Reverend Dr. Renita J. Weems. She is in that book, y'all, because she is that pastor. Okay. She is that person. And I am so grateful and so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here. I have been a fan of your podcast and of your Instagram page for quite some time. So I am honored and I was stunned by the invitation.
Well, I am so glad to have you here. This is fantastic. Now, one of the things I was interested in, that we could talk a bit about how your quilting and sewing and your leadership, as well as your own creative practice as a writer, as a thinker, as a scholar, as a pastor, as a woman of faith, all of these things seem to come together so seamlessly in your life. One of the quotes that you have in the foreword of your book on Just a Sister Away is you talk about the common thread of women's experience. And that can become a link between women of today and women of the past, in particular in the Bible. Can you talk a little bit about how that, if you might see in some sense, how sewing might show up as that type of connection?
This is a wonderful question, because it gives an opportunity to just kind of probably wax about something that I care about so much. But what the platform allows me to talk about sewing and Black women's writings and the Bible and women's leadership and women in the church. And I think that certainly I welcome joining you this afternoon because it allows me to do that. And it is precisely the image that you use, which is thread or the seam. Those two images, if you will, someone who is visual. I think you picked right up on it. I don't know if it has been seamless, but it certainly has been a thread throughout much of my life, but I think also Black women's lives as well. This whole notion of sewing, this whole notion of crafts, this whole notion of using one's hands, this whole notion of being creative, what you're feeling on the inside, expressing it with your hands. I think is very important. I love stories in the Bible. Because I am a church woman or whatever that language is now. So images of Mary and Martha cooking, having an argument because Jesus is there. Martha comes and complains to Jesus and tell my sister to come in here in this kitchen with me because there's a lot of work here. And I mean, so that notion of that. So there are a lot of stories about women cooking. There's a lot of stories about women preparing and hosting people. There are not enough stories about women and in the Bible, but there are beautiful stories. Now listen. When I was younger, and I'm older than you, when I was younger, I think this is a part of a conversation that I have, if not here, but some other time. Remember, I came up during a period when we were anti the domestic arts, if you will. We were rebelling as a women's rights movement, if you will, to all things domestic, correct? I mean, you just did not admit that you cooked or that you sewed or that you did anything domestic. I mean, now that was a burgeoning of the crafts movement during that particular period. So there were both these things. But in terms of who were thinking women, can I use that? Those of us who were intellectuals, those of us pursuing PhDs, those of us who wanted careers, we thought we had to distance ourselves from all things domestic arts or women's crafts, the private lives of women in terms of the things we did in our home. And yet, of course, I am from the boomer generation. I don't think I took sewing in high school, but I grew up with women in my family who sewed by all means. And so therefore I had to learn to sew. My first big project was my high school prom dress.
Wow.
This is the early 70s. This was not necessarily unusual to sew your dress. And so that image of women sewing was a part of my life. And I went to an Ivy League women's when I graduated from college. I had a boyfriend, had a singer, featherweight. He came to, I don't know how he stole his mama's singer's featherweight, and I think he was going to pawn it for some weed or something. I don't know what it was.
He was a real catch.
Yeah, a real catch. I'm telling you, I didn't marry Bubba. But I did date him for a couple of minutes. But part of our breaking up, I ended up with the singer featherweight. I don't even know to this day but thanks to God, that singer featherweight I used to sew my first outfits for my first job on Wall Street.
Wow.
When I finished college, I was an economics major, and my first job was a public accountant in Boston, and then I went down to New York for Merrill Lynch as a stockbroker, and I sold all my little singer Butterick pattern dresses from that singer featherweight machine. Yes. And so I took all of that. Now, of course, I never told anybody that I was sewing, working on Wall Street. I didn't tell anybody I was sewing. And after a while, once I started moving and doing some other kinds of things, I put down sewing, but I came back with about 12 years ago. I came back to it first through quilting and then through one day about 11, 12 years ago saying, why am I spending all this money on clothes when I do know how to sew? I mean, so quilting reminded me that I did know how to sew.
Yeah.
I started back sewing. So I love quilting. I loved quilting, but really quilting brought me back to draping my body.
Yeah.
feeling good about my body,
Yes.
getting in touch with my body,
Yes.
touching my body.
Yes.
It was a long time before I was sewing here these last when I didn't really want to measure my waist. I didn't want to see my hips.
Right.
I hate it when you made sewers say, now get your body measurements. I'm like, no, I don't want to.
I want to have a good time. Stop it. I don't want to be sad.
And it was when I finally broke that and just said, get the tape measure because everything you're making is not fitting you. But it was a whole body moment. It was a moment of reacquainting yourself with your body. You wanted to sew because your body was changing, but you didn't really want to look at your body. You really didn't want to touch it in that kind of way. So it was all of those kinds of things. And I think a lot of my scholarship, close with me, a lot of my own scholarship has been about women owning their bodies, loving themselves.
Yes.
And the truth of the matter is, it was still theoretical until I got that tape measure out.
Wow.
And actually,
Now that's a word.
That's a word.
It was
until
still
I actually
theoretical until I got that tape measure out. Wow.
Precisely. Yeah.
That is facts. That is so powerful because it feels so real. And I have absolutely been there. And one of my friends says she recommends using the centimeter side of the tape because we aren't on the metric system. We don't know what centimeters mean. So, it's really the same. It's just information. All you need is information. And if, we've been so, I think, ingrained to attach meaning to inch wide measurements. And like you can instantly judge your body based on this inch or that inch. But at least for me, because I don't think in centimeters, I can just say, oh, okay, that's right. 118. Okay, good. Set. All right, that's fine. Okay. And it doesn't give me the same, like anxiety. At the same time, it's also a practice, right? You've got to practice every day. You have to practice choosing to love yourself in the same ways that we like to think. At least I like to think that God loves us, which is without judgment, which is just like, this is your body. It's wonderful. It's part of who you are. And without it, you wouldn't be you. So let's just take stock of this so we can make sure your pants fit well. Doesn't matter. You only make
That's all you're trying to do.
That's all you got to do. Make your pants fit well for you.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. That was a great point.
For this week, we're going to talk about Word of the Year. And that is something that I started doing. I know people have done it for quite some time, but I didn't start doing it, I think, really seriously, maybe until last year. So let's take a few minutes and talk about Word of the Year. I've decided to go with a word that would also be a good reminder, something that can help center myself, help me just remember, help me to, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly. It's hard to put a finger on it exactly, but my word is abundance. Abundance, abundance, abundance. Abundance works well for me because it covers, or because it's such an abundant word, it covers a variety of concepts and practices in my life. So abundance is linked to Christianity and the New Testament especially. So that's something that's important to me. It relates to a very useful and important critique of capitalism, because capitalism relies on scarcity. And if there is abundance, and if you believe that there is abundance, then there is no scarcity. And also abundance is helpful for me as a reminder of my possibility. The things that I am limitless, as to quote Beyonce in Homecoming, that I am limitless, that all of these things are available in abundance, goodness, joy, love, all of these things. There's plenty. There's absolutely plenty. Also, since I really do believe and hope to practice as an ideal community over competition, competition is a scarcity mindset, that it's only one person who can do the one thing. If you're not number one, then you're in second place or whatever, and that's meant to be bad. That's not true. That doesn't operate when there is abundance. And if with an abundance mindset, an abundance philosophy, that's the reason why abundance is my word for 2022, because I definitely get in positions sometimes where I feel overwhelmed. I feel like, oh, I just can't do this, or it's just too much, et cetera, et cetera. And to rely on, to kind of pull back, to step back and to look around and say, I have what I need. I have abundance. There is abundance. I don't have to hurry and rush to get this thing before it like vanishes. All of that, the rush, the hurry, is something that is not necessary when there is abundance. And so that's just a concept that's really, I'm really excited to practice and remind myself of. And hopefully I can hold on to it when things kind of, get rough. I also think about the show Pose, which I really love the show Pose. And Electra's house is the house of abundance. And I don't want to give any spoilers or anything of the sort, but Electra has been a character throughout the series who has had an abundance mindset and abundant practices and belief systems when she had nothing at all. She had herself, and that was the key to the abundance. And I think that's true for all of us. So that's why abundance is my word of the year.
So it becomes important for us to be able to measure ourselves without judgment, without stigma, because in some ways, sewing, at least for me, is a deeply intimate practice. I find it I won't say it's therapy, because in my opinion, therapy is therapy. Some people say sewing is my therapy. No, girl. Have you ever had an actual therapist that talks back to you and helps you, identify your problematic behaviors, because that is really helpful. It's very liberating. And so sewing is not my therapy. Therapy is my therapy, but it is therapeutic. And something I was interested in learning more about from you is, you talk about in your book, you look at the Song of Solomon as a way to help women connect to their passions. And so I definitely have a strong passion for sewing. Can you talk a little bit more about like how women's passion, or like, did sewing ever become a passion? Before it was like, no, I don't want to, to do this, but now you are doing it more, and you are measuring your body, and you are making gorgeous garments for yourself. You went from the quilt life to the garment life rather seamlessly, with the pun. Were you able to tap into different types of a vision of passion as part of that, and of that creative process?
Yes. I mean, great question. You certainly have read my text, and you certainly are aware of my books. Yeah, I think I look at the story of the Song of Solomon in particular, that I am looking at this Black-skinned woman there in Song of Solomon. I am Black and beautiful. Yeah. And I look at her to talk to women about what it means to be passionate, and what it means to have passion, what it means to be a woman of passion. That passion has to do with more than our sex life, our sex urge, our very genuine and real sexual needs. And so I'm talking about passion as that thing that consumes us, that we feel called to do, that transports us. I think both Alice Walker and Katie Cannon, in my field of religion, says, doing the work that your soul must have. That's your passion, doing the work that your soul must have. One of the things I say, particularly in that text that you're talking about, is save some passion for yourself. Don't give it all away to everybody else. Don't expend all of your passion even on sex and romance. Let me step back and say romance. And that we are raised as women to understand passion only to be around romance and sex. But passion is your life energy. Yes. And you must save some for yourself and save some for other kinds of pursuits. So yes, earlier in my life, in my career. My passion was my work. I was a professor at Vanderbilt Divinity School at the university and the graduate school for about 17 or 18 years. Passionate about that. As an aside, I recently purchased EndNote, the software to catalog all my books and to do all my citations. Now, Lisa, I consider myself to be digital, quasi-savvy. I'm obviously not a native. I stay on top of things, all right? But I had this little young sister PhD who's like my little mentee in some ways, but she digitally brings me along. So the other month, I'm just consumed writing these chapters for these books. I've agreed to contribute to it. And I'm talking to her about something in Microsoft Word. She said, so are you using EndNote? And I'm like, EndNote? What's EndNote? She said, you mean you've been writing all these years and you don't know EndNote? How have you been doing your citation? I said, I hate when it's time to do the bibliography. I hate footnotes because APA, MLA, Turabian, I just hate it. So she said, oh, Dr. Weems, my point is, it was just this last couple of months as I'm inputting all of everything, that I realized how many books I had written, how many articles I had written, how much I had produced. I didn't know how much I had produced. Sometimes you don't know how much you have produced. You don't even know how many things you have sown. You don't know how passionate you have been. You don't know your own passion. You don't even know your own knowledge production. You don't know your own, garment production, if you will. You don't know your own creativity. You just out there knocking it out.
Yes.
So for many, many years, after Vanderbilt and then going down to Spelman, teaching for 2 years as a Cosby visiting professor, and then some other kinds of things, I was passionate about writing, the academic writing that you and I have to produce. I was passionate about the travel and speaking. I was always teaching somewhere. So I would get off the road from speaking, get back into class the next morning, and then be back on the road somewhere speaking, whether it was at an academic conference or a church conference. All of that passion, because that takes a considerable amount of passion.
Yes, it does.
To do it over a long period of time. You see,
enjoy it.
And still enjoy it. So, and then one day I realized I had almost given all my passion to academic work or to my church work. And I was missing something that was privately mine in a room of my own.
Yes.
Where it may see the light of day, it might not see the light of day, but it's mine.
That's right.
And I need to bring some of the same passion to that work. And that's, I think, people who say, you quilt, you sew, because they only have seen one side. People don't know how to bring the artist and the academic, the scholar and the artist, the preacher and quilter, the professor and the sewist. They are surprised because in our world, those are diametrically opposed women. They are diametrically different.
That's right. One of the things that I find with that description, it just reminds me about who are categories built for. Categories are built to put people and things in places, right? They're built to have structure or order. They're not particularly about liberation, right? Right. They're not particularly about, like, if you are a pastor and you are a theologian and you are a sewist, you are not meant to be all of these things. It's like, pick one, right? But what, Kimberly Crenshaw and other folks who have done with critical race theory is that they've taught us that intersectionality means, especially Black women in particular, are the reason this concept exists, right? That Kimberly Crenshaw made it to describe a Black woman who, in this getting free versus like whatever the law case was in 1983, this was designed to expose the ways that Black women in particular represent a defiance and a transcendence of category, right? The categories are women and Blacks. These are categories that have been created that leave out Black women all the time, right? And so when you talk about this diametric opposition between the creative and the scholarly, now the new phenomenon seems to be, before interdisciplinarity, it seems to be more like bringing the arts back into all forms of knowledge production and not just the humanities. So it seems like Black women, we have already been doing the balance, right? Already been doing and trying to pursue work that is meaningful to us, while also breaking down categories that want to keep so many realms separate.
So many. But what does the book say? But some of us are brave.
But some of us are brave. That's right.
But
That's
some
right.
of us are brave. All the men are Black.
Like all the women are white. All the Blacks are men.
All the women are white. Yeah, all the Blacks are men. Right. But some of us are indeed the notion that we fall within those two categories, and yet at the same time we fall within our own category. But there are those overlapping realities for us by all means, and that we challenge all boxes. We challenge all boxes in an attempt to try to, hem us in. But I think I may you say this. This is a message I think important to this podcast is to say it is a caution to even us as sisters, as Black women, as women, that we are not to replicate doing that to one another as well. So it's not always they do it to us, those men do it to us, or those white. But come on, sisters, listen to this podcast. The ways in which we ourselves say, oh, Lisa is a professor and a sewist. We fall into those traps ourselves.
Yes.
And we have to be mindful of that. Yeah.
That is so true. You are absolutely right. We fall into those traps. And I know that, Baldwin and so many other people have kind of talked about this, you as well, about the way that we internalize things that we think we might supposed to do, but we internalize a lot of things that don't serve us well. And that part of our work is trying to figure out how can we live full, total, whole lives. That's my plan. That's my goal. And I fall short of that a lot, but you know what? That's my falling short of my own expectations, not anybody else's, because I don't care about that.
Anybody else. Yeah. What that line in Sula where she says, I did things my own, and Nell says to Sula, well, you're lonely. I bet you're lonely. She said, but it's my lonely. It's my lonely. It wasn't lonely. It was handed me by somebody else. So I love that kind of line.
I do too.
Yeah,
I do too.
I may be lonely, but it's my lonely.
It's my lonely.
Didn't nobody hand me no lonely. I accepted my own lonely. I lived my life in a way I made my own self lonely, but no man made me lonely.
Exactly.
That's what she's saying.
Exactly right. And then Sula tells Nell after Nell's husband leaves, she says, look at you. You got a secondhand lonely.
A secondhand lonely.
You got a secondhand lonely. How about that?
I may have to tweet that after this. There's a secondhand lonely. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
You got a secondhand lonely.
And I mean, on that note, that beautiful quote by Toni Morrison about Sula, if I may.
Yes, please tell me.
That you and I both love so much. I mean, just Toni Morrison. You just know Toni Morrison nails it every time. Every time. But she has this line, let me quote it. In a way, her strangeness, her naivete, her craving for the other half of her equation was the consequence of an idle imagination. But had she paints or clay, or knew the discipline of the dance or strings, had she anything to engage her tremendous curiosity and her gift for metaphor, she might have exchanged the restlessness and preoccupation with whim for an activity that provided her with all she yearned for. But like any artist with no art form, she became dangerous. Oh my God.
Yeah.
If that's not it. My God.
It.
That's it.
An artist with no art form, dangerous.
But she puts her finger on, has she that sewing, quilting, cooking, gardening, they are disciplines.
They are.
That even art itself is creating calls for a certain amount of discipline.
Yes.
The discipline of it. She said, has she something to discipline that passion? Discipline that tremendous energy of hers. Discipline that whimsical, idle side of her. Something to bring her back in. Something to run all that energy back in. Something to, it is like, I mean, you have children. I have a daughter. But those who even don't, who have seen children, you're always trying to help them harness that energy and say, baby, if I could just get all of that energy and let me get you in football, let me get you in basketball, let me get you in ballet, let me get you photography, let me get you playing guitar or piano to harness that, you need discipline.
Yes.
I don't want to kill it.
No.
I don't want to, I want you to discipline that energy and create something with it, and so that it does not become self-destructive. I think that is what we're putting, what sewing, quilting, what cooking, what gardening, what playing the piano, they are as much as your and my writing for tenure promotion. It is a discipline.
Yes. And the idea of the unbridledness of passion, like what happens, I mean, because you're going to have this creative spirit, you're going to have it, right? Why not use it? I really love what you said about saving some passion for yourself. That women, that sometimes it seems as though we are, particularly if one wants to follow certain Bible models in more patriarchal modes, it's all about like women's role is service, and not service to ourselves, service to somebody else, right? About self-denial, self-abnegation, etc. And that does not have to be that way. That there are lots of models for following one's passion as a way to fortify oneself. You know, like that example they say, you know, before, like on an airplane, be sure to put on your own oxygen mask first before helping other passengers, right? That for many, at least for me, the creating of sewing, of quilting, of the needle arts, that is how I put on my own oxygen mask. That is how I restore my energy. That is how I, you know, start to feel lighter when things are heavy, right? And so the to cultivate that practice just seems so healthful, so healthy. And one of the things I appreciate about your work is that you invite this consideration all the time, that this becomes a part of one's spiritual practice, one's self-beholding or self-regard. And that's what I think is one of the beautiful contributions of the legacy of your work, is for Black women.
Let me just say, you are a literary critic, a Black feminist literary critic, or professor of literature. I am a failed literary critic, failed Black woman professor of literature. So I just went into religion because I couldn't do it. I wanted to be a novelist. I wanted to write novels. I wanted to do literature. Earlier, many years ago, people still meet me now and say, I remember you used to write for Essence magazine. And I say, yeah, I did. In the 80s, 70s, and 80s. I wanted to be a literary figure. I wanted to write like Toni Morrison. Let me just own that. Okay. This is before Beloved. So this is the Sula and the Blue Eye. Right? Okay. Yeah. Alice Walker, this is Up to Meridian. This is not The Color Purple yet. This is Strange Life of Grange Copeland. Grange
Copeland, yes.
That's right. Okay. And so we're talking Polly Marshall, Brown Girl, Brown Stones. Okay. So I'm talking about era writing, right? My undergraduate degree was economics. I was in college, particularly where I went to school, when there was a infusion of women, white women, Black women, into the business world. My year of graduating college was the year we were getting MBAs and law degrees. My degree was in economics. So I saw myself on Wall Street.
Oh, yes.
Went to New York, worked at Merrill Lynch, got my license. The first day, my job Merrill Lynch, after I got my license, I went into the women's bathroom and I wrote on a sheet of paper, I hate my job. And that's when I started writing. That was the day I started writing. I had never
Wow.
entertained writing. I had not been a literature major at Wellesley. I took one course with Hortense Spillers,
Nice.
but I was econ the whole way. I was econ, economics. But it's the hating of a job with Merrill Lynch that sent me into the women's bathroom to cry and say, "Oh, I hate this. I don't want to do this. I hate this."
Gosh.
I don't know how I found about this women's bookstore up at 92nd in Amsterdam named Woman's Book. I made my way up there. Somebody told me about it, and I found my muse. This was back when feminist bookstores were proliferating. That's a whole nother article, academic article on that.
That's true.
Women's bookstore was at 92nd in Amsterdam. And in that bookstore, little tiny bookstore, probably no larger than my sewing room right here. And it had a couch and it had all the Black women's literary novels. It had white women's. I hadn't read Virginia Woolf. I hadn't read Willa Cather. I hadn't read Flannel O'Connor. I hadn't read Toni Morrison. I hadn't read Polly Marshall. And my healing was after working in Merrill Lynch downtown at the Pan Am building, yes, I would then take the train up to 92nd and Amsterdam and spend the evening at Woman Books,
Wow.
acquainting myself with Black women's literature and women's literature, period. And I fell in love with writing. That is how I really started wanting to be a writer. And then I met a girlfriend who was an editor. I tell you people now, this is back before Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And on the board, Lisa, remember the board? And we used to have the little index cards. If you are interested in reading Black women's literature, please call this telephone number. And that was, what was it called, that board that they always had,
like
everybody.
A bulletin board?
The bulletin board. And so if you go into the bookstore, you always look in the bulletin because you just know what you're going to sit there. And there was a sister who was an editor at Essence, but that's not how she introduced herself. She was just looking for other Black women who love Black literature. Right. And she finished Yale and had been a roommate. And I called her and she said, "Well, you want to meet on Sundays and we can just start reading books together?" And I was like, yes, because I needed a two, okay. Yes. And from there, because she worked at Essence, she learned about this group called Sister, because she was already on the end with knowing about what Black women were doing in New York.
Yes, that's
she
right.
Invited, we were both young undergrad, well, we just finished our undergraduate degree. And she said, "Listen, I understand that Alice Walker and Ntozake Shange and June Jordan have started this group called Sisterhood. And Black women in literature throughout New York meet on Sundays once a month here in the city. And they meet at Alice's house or at June's house. And I'm working at Essence, and I'm a junior editor. I'm nobody on the totem pole, but they tell me about it." She said, "You want to know?" I was like, yeah, let's go. Let's crash the party.
I get to go to a reading group at Alice Walker or June Jordan's house. Yes, please. What?
Yes, please. Even back then, there was a yes, please.
Oh, my
And when we got there, you are meeting all the luminaries. You're reading Marie Brown, who was at Random House at the time. You're meeting, I don't think I ever saw Toni Morrison come to that particular day. Verda May Grosvenor.
Oh, my gosh.
You're talking about, Polly Marshall. Of course, I'm Polly Marshall. Girl, because they were all there because of Alan and June. And so the rest of us are just kind of, the non-published, unpublished, never will be published, whatever. We just sat over in the corner and said, would you like food? And just Ntozake came a couple of times. I mean, people were in and out all the time, but it really was a collective. I know that's the word you all use now, collective.
Yes.
Of Black women who were movers and shakers, who were intellectuals, because it wasn't just literary scholars, right? But it was the Black, the talented, the intelligentsia of sisters in the New York area in late 70s who wanted to get together and say, "Listen, let's get together and let's talk." And so that's how I joined that for about a couple of of years. And so I really wanted to do writing. When that didn't pan out, I did do some things for Essence. And I ultimately left Merrill Lynch, of course, because I thought I'm going to write a great American novel. I want to do a 19th century abolitionist novel, using characters like Lydia Maria Childs and William Lloyd Garrison. Girl, I can go. Listen, you don't have time for me to do.
Listen, that book is still in there. I think that idea is still in there. So
what I tell people when I tell the story is, then my landlord wanted his rent.
How dare
he had this idea. Yeah,
you are an artist,
right?
Okay? You can't work on landlord time.
I quit Merrill Lynch. My my monthly check had run out. Unemployment check ran out, and then I heard people say, "Were you called?" I said, "Let's just say I was broke." And I said, "Did God call you to ministry?" Let's just say I couldn't pay my rent. And I will end with this. I was always in the church. I was always still going to buy. My best was still women in religion. So I would be at church on Sundays, and I would run up to New York into the city to listen to John Henry Clark, Flo Kennedy, Toni Morrison. And I would run back to revivals with my little beanie on my head. And then on Tuesdays, I would back listen to some radical lesbian poetry. And then I would go back to church and teach Bible study. I had always these two lives, church and my radical passion for social justice, feminist sensibility. And I didn't know there was no way back then to bring them together. So I didn't tell the church world I was hanging out with radical feminists, lesbian activists, and I sure didn't tell them that I was going to revival on Monday nights. And I heard, and because I always been I'd heard that Princeton was looking for Black students, Princeton Seminary, and I figured, how hard? I use this phrase all the time. How hard could religion be? So I figured, I do this church thing, I do Bible study, and I still want to write this novel. But if I go over to Princeton Seminary, I'll be in a dorm, I get 3 square meals, I won't have to worry about rent, and I can write my novel and take the religion courses on the side.
On the side, because how hard can it be, really? I mean,
how hard can religion be? And that's how I became in ministry. That's how I became a professor of Bible, because I got over there and said, I'm going to work on my novel, get me have a dorm room, make some meals in the rectory, but I'm going to work on my novel and go take the little Bible and religion and that little stuff.
On the side,
and on the side. And then I got bit by religion and I found ways to bring my literary side and my religious scholarship together. Lisa, I know I'm telling you a whole lot here, but that's how.
I am honored to hear it and grateful to hear it, because what I'm hearing is this beautiful self-fashioning, right? That you are modeling what you are writing about in your books, right? You were able to follow a variety of passions, a passion for freedom and social justice, a passion for Black women's literature and culture, a passion for the breaking down of all sorts of categories by race, sex, gender, sexuality. All of that was something you're committed to. And also you're committed to the church. You're committed to Sunday services. You're committed to Sunday church, Sunday school. Yeah. You're committed to revival. You're committed to Bible study. You're committed to all of those things. And your passion's about all of it. And so when you look back at what you have done, what I'm able to summarize, obviously not summarize, I can allude to this line from this book and this line from this book. And when you put them together, it's almost exactly as it should have been, right? So your landlord wanted rent, and that was part of the call as well. Your landlord called and said, you owe me money. And then you got the bigger call from the Lord that was like, you know what, you might as well go.
Oh, you're doing well. You are a literary scholar, girl. You have read novels, haven't you? You are doing well telling this story. Go right ahead.
Girl,
Don't
please,
stop.
I'm just listen. I'm just summarizing what you just said because you just said. I mean, God, I didn't know everything you just said. I'm a good summarizer. You have really given us a model and also showing what it means to forge your own path truly, right? Because you were able to write your way into a life of purpose. And not just the writing, of course, it's not just the legacy of your written and scholarly contributions. It's also the preaching. It's also the, going around and doing the things that you do and meeting with people and just being a possibility model for the ways that we can free ourselves, the way that we can find ways to sustain ourselves, which becomes so necessary for Black women living in a country and amongst the dominant culture that doesn't really give a shit, as it were, about how we thrive or not. That's something I thought is just so beautiful about your work. And now I'm also having the horrible realization that I just said a cuss word in front of a pastor. So that's something that I'll be thinking about for the rest of the day.
I will be a pope right now and absolve my daughter. You have been absolved, my daughter.
I thank you.
You cannot kiss my ring, but just know that you have absolved my daughter. That is not the worst thing that God has ever heard, nor as a preacher have I ever heard or said myself. So, but if I may kind of squeeze this in, whether we haven't time to, I just want to say how much I admire you and admire your work. When you interviewed Rita of the other week, the month when it was, how I just love the synergy between the two of you. But then you mentioned what the young people said, you dropped some knowledge there for a minute there that just caught my attention. When I drops of something, I don't know, my 28-year-old daughter heard me, she would be rolling her eyes. Oh, there goes my mama trying to be relevant. But anyway, you studied with Nellie McKay. That you studied with Nellie McKay, who was a foremost personality founder in the Black feminist literary movement of that era. And when you mentioned Nellie McKay, my head, I think I was sewing. My neck popped and said, "Is that right?" She said, and also because your class, that she probably is not your classmate. I don't know if you and Shanna Benjamin were classmates.
Yeah, we were in the same cohort. Yeah, she's young. She's a few years after me. She came like maybe 3 years after me. But we were there together. Yes.
I have touted this book, Half in Shadow, so much.
Oh my God.
I post, I've tweeted, and I keep telling it. But so now some of my womanist friends are beginning to post it. This morning somebody said, "Oh my God, you just got to read this because it's about Nellie, because it's so interesting." But it is the story of a student.
Yes.
Writing about her beloved professor.
Yes, it is.
And all the complications of that.
Yes.
All the complications of. But what I loved is those of us who are professors knowing one day maybe one of our students may be doing the same, but also telling the story of the early decades of Black women's literature.
Yes.
And the story of Brittany Cooper's question, what it means to be a Black female intellectual.
Yes.
What it means to be a professor. What it means to be a producer of knowledge.
Yes.
And I mean, Shana does this, but she does more than that. But for someone who is at my point in my career, who looking back, reading this, all of those questions are already in my own life. And I bring all of that to the reading of Half in Shadow about Nellie McKay. And it brings up a lot of memories of that period and those writers and those people who I've read, but also to know that now I'm talking to one of her students.
Yes.
One of her students who obviously was, I've read Shana Benjamin's book, but when you said, "Oh yeah, my professor was Nellie McKay," I never dropped my finger machine saying, "Oh my God, this has just got to be God. This has just got to be God."
It is. I think it is. I think it is.
The circle.
It's a real blessing because she was a wonderful mentor and guide and deeply committed to the discipline, as well as to helping us become as skilled, as practiced, as poised, as confident and competent. Like she was really excellent on the page about helping people, at least it was my writing, helping me to just think harder, to think more carefully. And that is a really generous gift when someone is so patient with your work. And that's something that she did for me. And the idea of working with someone who created a whole discipline, right? Who built, it reminds me of that famous poem. I think this is an Alice Walker poem where she talks about how these that looking back at Black women and that we like built movements out of the pots and pans of our kitchens, or we built and financed whatever from the dirt on our hands in our gardens, that we would sell this produce all the way through before pre-capitalism. It was just about community building. And that was something that I absolutely felt as her student. Absolutely.
But did you know she was starting a movement? Did she know she was starting a discipline?
I think she did, because I remember when talking with her, she helped to create what Black Studies became. What she was also interested in, and I guess Shauna would know more of the details, she really loved the American Studies Association Conference. She did a lot of work with MLA because that was the discipline where literary studies was, and of course, and she did a lot of leadership, a lot. At the same time, I think ASA still is more fun and more interesting, and I don't like MLA. I find it dry and scary and so much scarcity. You know what I mean? It's just horrible. But ASA, American Studies Association, is so much more fun. And I don't know, I think AAR, the American Religious Y'all's Conference, that professional conference, that looks like it's fun as well. It looks like everybody has more fun than MLA.
I always hear that about MLA. I have always heard that about MLA.
It's true. Don't go. I mean, it's not.
Okay.
It's really not. Oh, it's so unfortunate. Right. Maybe I shouldn't say that about my own professional organization, but I much prefer ASA. And I think it was because of the fluidity and flexibility, and MLA is really a lot of very staid, sometimes very European driven still, very, they're very, very slow on the social justice uptake. Like it's a big, huge thing that can be hard to move, I imagine. But that's okay. Anyone who's listening to this, don't invite me to be on any committees because I don't want to change it from within. I don't want to do it.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this question. So I'm going to be releasing this episode at the start of 2022. And this is going to be a way to welcome us back. I'm going to be taking a hiatus from the podcast for December. And so some of the first episodes of the new year will happen in January. And so I wondered if you could share a little bit of advice about recommendations that you might have to just help us get started off on this new year in a good right foot, like anything that you like to do for a reset or how you deal with transitions. You obviously deal well with them because you do great in general.
My various sayings that I'm sure I'm going to post all around my place at the beginning of the year. 1, well-behaved women do not change history. So I have to always remember that well-behaved women. So I have never behaved. So I don't doubt, I'm sure that in 2022, I will not be any less belligerent, vocal, headstrong, hell-raising, fire-breathing in 22 as I have been elsewhere. I've made my peace with that. I am not well-behaved. I am not conventional. It took me a long while, but it's just so radical. And oh my gosh, I used to fear that word. I am. Secondly, if you want to fly, you have to jump off the cliff and learn how to fly on the way down. You build your wing on the way down. But first, you have to just go ahead and jump. You don't jump and say, I need to learn how to fly before I jump. No, you learn to fly when you have jumped. So I think if you want to talk about transition, you want to talk about a brand new year, I think that coming out of this COVID pandemic that we have come out of, the playing field has been leveled. I think in some ways, you can be whoever you want. You can start from scratch now. You can start with just patches of fabric now and build who you want to be and create who you want to be. It is a frightening time and it is an exciting time. I think that 100 years from now, when our granddaughter, great granddaughters look back on this period, I hope we say to them, we were certainly frightened coming out of this COVID. We were frightened within it, but we came out of it also. This is also exciting because now we will never work the same way that we used to work.
Right.
Our notion of time is different than it has ever been. Our sense of what we can accomplish has changed over the last 20 months. We have discovered that we were stronger than we thought we were. We also discovered community. We have now longed for one another in ways that we had not longed for. Being with our girlfriends, laughing and talking, touching one another, going out for drinks or for a meal, spending time with family. I think so many rituals, and I'm talking also as a minister, as a pastor, as someone who doesn't know what the future of the church is, the Black church. Will people ever come back the way they used to be? I don't know. We are suffering in some real ways in that area. But at the same time, it's exciting. It's exciting because it behold all things brand new to some degree. And there's a scripture said, behold, I do a new thing in the earth. And I got to see this, Lisa, as a new thing. I got to see, and I am grateful to have lived at this moment in time to look at younger women and this girl, come on, you can do this. You have so much more available to you than I did. Yeah. And saying this to my daughter, it's frightening what's going to happen with Wade versus Roe. Now you want me to, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yes.
I'm concerned about Black women and their sexual reproductive health and freedoms.
Yes.
But at the same time, I will close with this. I read a writer who said, every generation has its, and he's talking in a European setting, every generation has its own Berlin Wall. And I would say every generation has its Edmund Pettus Bridge. Yes. Every generation has its Montgomery bus. Yes. Every generation, and maybe for my daughter's generation, this what happens to Roe versus Wade. Baby, every generation has its Ferguson.
Yes.
But listen, I can't lay down on the ground with y'all no more. I'm too old because after y'all gonna pick me up. I can't be out there all smelling smoke and all that. Baby, I'm past that age. I can give you my intellectual capital now, but I can't be out there on the road with you. But this is their generation to figure out. You got your evil, I got my evil. We had our evil. Now you have your evil. You have your Edmund Pettus Bridge, your Berlin Wall. We're passing the baton on to you. But it is exciting. And one day you will look back on it and say, look at what God has done. Look at what my generation did. Look what our music did. Look what our art did. Look what our creations did.
Yes.
And all I can say is just say some passion. After you have raised hell, been out there, done your Black Lives Matter protest, brought the white man down, and done all of that. Now save some passion for yourself.
Yes.
And go to your garden, go to your sewing machine, make your mama's biscuits, go do somebody's hair, go do something that feeds your soul. Go put on Nina Simone and Ella Baker and, Minnie Riperton and feed your soul. Because there's always going to be more evil tomorrow and more of a battle day after tomorrow. And you need to nourish yourself so that you might be strong to fight the enemy.
Oh, I love it. And on that note, we are so thankful to the Reverend Dr. Renita J. Weems. And this, I hope, will not be our only conversation. I would love to have you back. We will absolutely have to make that happen. But where can folks find you if they want to learn more about you? I'll be sure to put all your links in the chat.
I'm on Twitter at Something Within. My Instagram is the same at Something Within. My website, Renita Weems, no middle initial. This one is renitaweems.com, I believe. So you will have everything else. I'm reachable. I'm accessible, if you will. I'm social media platformable, if you will. So it is a continuation of my own working and my own blog. So I love raising hell, and I love chatting about raising hell. So let's do it.
Let's do it. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Yay. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Stitch Please podcast, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. We appreciate you supporting us by listening to the podcast. If you'd like to reach out to us with questions, you can contact us at blackwomenstitch@gmail.com. If you'd like to support us financially, you can do that by supporting us on Patreon, Patreon. And you can find Black Women Stitch there in the Patreon directory. And for as little as $2 a month, you can help support the project with things like editing, transcripts, and other things to strengthen the podcast. And finally, if financial support is not something you can do right now, you can really, really help the podcast by rating it and reviewing it anywhere you listen to podcasts that allows you to review them. So I know that not all podcast directories or services allow for reviews, but for those who do, for those that have like a star rating or just ask for a few comments, if you could share those comments and say nice things about us at the Stitch Please podcast, that is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. Come back next week and we'll help you get your stitch together.